Oriole fans. Maybe a little different audience today, different type of video. So thank you for joining us here on our channel, the Ravenry Sports Podcast, today for our review of the Stephen A. Smith Up for Debate review of that video, of that docu-series that came out recently on ESPN Plus, and we're going to have a little sports media discussion around that here. So, as we always do, if this is the first time watching one of our videos, like and subscribe to all of our social media content. If you go ahead, we go live every Wednesday night on Twitch, on Twitter, and on YouTube. 8 o'clock, usually around 8 o'clock, pushing maybe some of them back a little bit at some weeks because of the Orioles. Okay, so maybe it airs at 9, whatever. We're going to give you a chance to watch the Oriole game on a Wednesday night when they're playing on a Wednesday night. Keep that in mind. But otherwise, right around 8 o'clock. Thank you for that as well. A couple other bit of business. RavenrySports.company.site. You can get Ravens jerseys like this one. This is my private stash from Kelly Gregg, my boy, Buddy Lee. One of the jerseys. You can get jerseys like this right on our website, RavenrySports.company.site. App is coming soon as well. So we're going to get an app for you. For those, especially you young people who never pick up a laptop or whatever, you can go ahead and go on there as well. Genesis Notary Services /Facebook.com. So definitely, if you live in the Shenandoah Valley area, definitely come check it out. Go to Google. A lot of gigs I've been getting are on Google. So some people have been just Googling the name Genesis Notary Services with Chester, Virginia. Absolutely, book a session, make a call. Numbers right on there. Absolutely, we're more than happy to go ahead and help you with that. And it is C. Charles Harris. We are LegalShield.com. Definitely check that out as well. If you need any help with your legal services, whatever, value is tremendous for Legal Shield. So definitely, please check that out as well. Go to the website and explore that. All right, so why are we here? We're talking a little bit different today. This isn't directly, we're going to get a little bit about the Baltimore state of it as well, how that's changed, but a little bit of a long form today, and we're talking a little bit about Up for Debate that came out. So interesting. ESPN recently put out the video Up for Debate, right? It was produced by Stephen A. Smith, who is, needs no introduction. He's their number one sports commentator, maybe the top one right now in all sports. It's been the case the last several years. And he's talking about, in the docuseries, the state of sports media, right? So if you haven't checked it out, it is on ESPN Plus. You do have to have ESPN Plus to go ahead and check that out. I definitely would check it out. I think that it in and of itself is good, but it brings up a lot of debates as well in that. No pun intended, I guess. With Up for Debate, why would a guy who is at the helm of legacy media, when you are the top guy at ESPN, there's no question about it. It was at one point Chris Berman. Why would he want to explore sports media and where it's going, whatever? So it's interesting. So I thought that in itself was an interesting topic. And I think sports media in itself is an interesting debate as well. First of all, I thought the video presentation of it was great. I mean, it definitely looked like a top shelf video presentation as well. It looked like an ESPN produced it. So he said it was his production company that did it, Stephen A. Smith. And I thought the video presentation of it, the music of it, the sounds, I thought were excellent. It was really good. So no question about that. Like a lot of docuseries, it's a 3-part docuseries. It's kind of split up into 30 minutes. And it talked about a little bit the era. It definitely, you could tell it was his creation, right? His sign off on it. Because the time period he kind of like us. He's about in his late 50s. I'm in my 40s. I got a brother about late. That's kind of like the 70s. It's kind of like me coming up as a sports fan like early in the 80s. Came up. He's about 10 years older than me. That's about right. So it kind of started in the 70s. He references the great Howard Cosell, the sports and talking about Earl Weaver and the retiring birds of Baltimore. Right. Howard had that unmistakable voice. I was just kidding there, but that was how he sounded for 3 hours. Howard was unmistakable, and Howard and Stephen A. Smith's career, I would absolutely align. kind of the same guy. Howard, I think Stephen A. is definitely, I don't want to say he's imitating Howard exactly, but Howard had the same reputation. Top guy at ABC for years, really a top sportscaster, but never really seen by a lot of people as a good, in a way, not like revered like a Dick Schaap, like who's prominently for, Dick Schaap was seen, or Michael Wilbon or somebody like that. Stephen A. is kind of seen as a bit of a joker, right, by a lot of people, and so is Howard. But Howard was a big time announcer. He was a huge celebrity. He was at a lot of sporting events. He did Monday Night Football. They talked about that. They talked about his years on Monday Night Football. I know my dad loved Howard Cosell because of the relationship he had with Muhammad Ali. He was very close to Muhammad Ali. So definitely you talk about debate TV and stuff like that. Howard was kind of the precursor for it. So you definitely want to talk about Howard Cosell. So that definitely made a lot of sense to me that when you have a Stephen A. Smith talking about it. Talked about a show, started it like in the early 90s, the Sports Reporters, that was on ESPN. Kind of like, that was kind of like on Sunday mornings, they used to have that before the NFL. I used to watch it. Kind of like the precursor to debate shows. I think that's kind of right bucket. It wasn't exactly like it. Mike Lupica on there was so annoying. I didn't like it. I know they had respect for John Saunders and Dick Schaap, but Lupica was just an idiot. So I never liked that as well. But it was kind of like, it was a more dignified version of what you saw today. Like, it was more the reporter-ish type show, debate-ish type. So I can understand why that's there. It talked a lot about 1970, the beginning of ESPN, Wild World of Sports, things like that. So I will say this: a lot of people don't understand. ESPN started in '79. Like, even when I was coming up in the ESPN in the '80s, there was not a lot of on ESPN. A lot of the content like you see now. Like, they had rugby. I think the first ESPN game they showed it was a softball game. They had a lot of stuff like that. Like, there wasn't NBA. There wasn't MLB. That didn't happen until 10, 11 years down the line where they started to get some of that stuff. I think they had NBA early on for a little while or something. But NFL, that they didn't have a lot of that stuff, right? Chris Fowler, voice college football, he was covering high school sports. So I remember. So it's evolved. So it kind of showed where they became the juggernaut. Showed where that Sports Center era. I think if you're talking about the 90s and Sports Center was must-see television. I think it actually took the place of the nightly news and things like that in the early 2000s, late 90s. If you're a sports fan, you watch Sports Center for sure. Definitely 11 o'clock. They talked about Dan Patrick, etc. So the history, which I think makes sense to actually go over that. So the second one, probably at that point now, they talked about the start of First Take. Interesting. This was, you could tell now, when you're talking about First Take, where the start of First Take, where this was more Stephen A.'s thing here. Definitely. They talked a lot about, of course, First Take was a show that was a sports show, but it was part of their morning show that really didn't do well, like Cold Pizza. They talked about it. I almost forgot, but Cold Pizza was the name of it. So they had a little debate segment, Woody Page and Skip Bayless. They had a little debate segment on there as well. And the debate segment did better, etc. So Skip goes on and becomes the debate, and he brings Stephen A. Which I think is fascinating that he brought him in. That showed a lot of character of him. Skip Bayless was featured heavy in this. Was interesting. Guess who wasn't featured much? It was Max Kellerman. I thought that was wild. They really spoke glowingly of Skip's efforts. They talked about the argument he had with Chris Bosh. They talked about the argument he had with various Richard Sherman. They showed that, but kind of like went past Max, which I thought was kind of. I mean, Max was in it, I suppose, but it really didn't go out of his way. Max didn't sit for it. as well. Now, Max, I don't know what the contract status is at ESPN for some of those guys, where Max could have done it. I don't know, but it's possible. It was a little odd that they didn't have Max there. Interesting that they didn't have Max prominently featured in that. You could tell who his friends were. Like you saw Kerry Champion there, Jamel Hill, Dan Lebertard, Bomani Jones was in it a lot. I thought that was odd. I thought it was odd they talked about the Jim Rome, Chris Everett. Even I said Chris, the Jim Everett fight, where Jim calls him Chris. Chris was a tennis player, female tennis player back in the 80s and 70s, and Jim Rome I've never liked Rome. I never did get it. But it kind of made him famous. You know, he actually said it to his face, which is a tough thing to do, athlete as well. Race debate, mentioned that the J.J. Redick argument that he had with Kendrick Perkins was that SAS and J.J. and Jay Williams debating on Kyrie, where he said it's personal with Kyrie, which is obvious. By the way, it's obvious. For whatever reason, whatever reasons, Stephen A. doesn't like Kyrie, which is pretty obvious as well. And that was pretty much the second one. The third part of it, we kind of go into the modern thing, what's going on now, where legacy media is pretty much interrupted, which is absolutely what's happening. Look at us right now. I'm here on the Ravery Sports podcast, which is going live, which is going on YouTube and Twitter and Twitch. Savior's plug there. You can catch it every Wednesday, right? People like me can come out here and just do a podcast. Hey, I want to start a website, I want to sell my jerseys, I want to talk sports with people. We can actually just do that now. And that is what basically is going on. Talked about some of the dying of the legacy media. New York Times sports section, which stopped sports, which is insane to me. But it's been turned over to the Athletic. Club Shay Shay, the LeBron J.J. Redick podcast they talked about. Interesting, I did not know that Dan Orlowski was a guy that got the gig, basically, by posting things on Twitter, breaking down plays on Twitter. I had no idea that he did that. Very cool that he was able to go ahead and do that. I thought that was interesting. Talked a little bit about Mason Cameron podcast as well, which I do not watch. I was never a Mace fan. But it good for them. But it kind of talked about some of the prominent ones in the legacy media. He really didn't break down, I think, the small ones, or wasn't aware of some of the smaller podcasts that were out there. So I want to go over this as well. And that was basically it. I thought the presentation was great. Like a lot of docuseries, documentaries, you can kind of tell who his friends were. But I want to go over this here. I'm going to go ahead and cue this up for you guys and kind of go over what man Charles, his name's Charles, on Dreamers Flow has to kind of say about this. I want to go square this away for you guys. Hold on a second. Here we go.
Part of sports media, and I'll tell you why. The reason I'm getting sick of being a part of sports media is because there's a lot of gatekeeping that goes on. There's a lot of gatekeeping. There's a lot of, I have a right to talk, you don't have a right to talk. He should be talking, he should be talking, and he should be talking, and the rest of you need to shut the hell up. Essentially, what Stephen A. Smith is speaking to is the he's speaking to the decentralization of opinions, of media. That's what I think the fear is. Because traditionally, opinions were dispersed from either large publications, newspapers, or large media networks like ESPN, Fox Sports, maybe NBC, whatever, right? So the message can be controlled, number one. Number two, with that being the case, there was less competition. You only had to now compete against big bodies, big organizations, big entities. But now with the advent of social media and websites like YouTube, Rumble, and podcasting and all of that, you've now created more space for more voices to be there. So what has happened is, what has happened is that now there's more competition. Yes, it means that you may need more regulation in terms of understanding what's true and what's not. Essentially what I'm talking about is clickbaiting and coming up with false stories and all of that, because that certainly takes place. But at the heart of it, that's what he's talking about here. And now what is happening is you see that people are beginning to go away from from linear TV, excuse me, and now consuming content differently. That's why I wanted you guys to listen to what Mad Dog Russo had to say about how people are consuming content. They realize, like, okay, wait a minute. People are no longer tuning into television the way that they used to, so we need to get out here and compete.
There it is, right there. Correct, what he just said. And what he's talking about is gatekeeping, right? That's what Stephen A. That's why I thought it was so fascinating that of all people, like Stephen A., who is at the top of the pyramid, the ultimate gatekeeper, is talking about how he's excited of the lack of gatekeeping, right? The ultimate fear of what's coming on. Now, Stephen A. kind of said he was excited. That's probably right. But I mean, you could hear it like a lot of times during that thing. Bob Lee, the great Bob Lee, was in it. Jeremy Schaap was in it. A lot of those guys, Michael Wilbon was kind of, I don't understand. It's there. A lot of the gatekeeping, and let me tell you something. Gatekeeping is true in every industry, not just sports media. Gatekeeping exists. You ever been at a job and wonder why that same small group, right, always gets promoted, right? You ever wonder why that same? It's not just in media; it's everywhere, and it's the case in sports media. It's the same. You see it on YouTube. You see it in independent media. You see these same groups of guys kind of hang out together, and they kind of like get to, and they're like, well, we got time for these guys, but we don't have time for these guys over here. And these guys run these numbers up here, and you wonder how it definitely exists. My own career, I went to school at Coppin State for years ago for media, particularly sports media, for years, and I could tell you, a lot of us who went there never got jobs, never got good jobs. Right? Most of us, I've been turned down by some of the best companies. Let me tell you, the City Paper, the Afro American, the Baltimore Times, Washington outlets, ESPN. I went and did their when they had the reality show. I did their audition. I've auditioned a lot of places. I've had a lot of opportunities, and I haven't had a lot of opportunities, but I've had a lot of auditions, a lot of attempts, and gatekeeping exists. Gatekeeping is a real thing. Gatekeeping even on the inside of the door. Gatekeeping is a thing. And so the great part about now is a lot of that is gone. Not all of it. It still exists. I definitely see it in numbers. I see it in certain Baltimore YouTubers, people that I look at some of these numbers and it's a little something there. That's okay. That is going to exist. But the fact that the landscape is changing, it allows the fans, more what I'm concerned about, is us fans an opportunity to go ahead and look at things with a better lens. It allows us to look at things without a more critical lens. It allows players to have more freedom. He talked about how LeBron James, what does he need media at all for? Right? He's got 150 million followers on his account. He doesn't need to talk to ESPN to put a message on. He doesn't need to talk to them. He doesn't need to do any of that. He doesn't need any of that. They need them more than they need him. So the fact that the landscape is shifting. Masson is kind of like this as well. And let's talk about Baltimore a little bit. I don't even know right now. I'm not even sure that the Rubenstein family owns Masson. I haven't heard that talked about at all. I've asked that question a couple of times, but I hope to find that out. But the cable TV industry is really shifted. There's no more linear cable. In a lot of places, a lot of homes don't have it. I don't. A lot of people I know don't have cable anymore. If you do have it, maybe if a lot of men like mine, frankly, only have for the ball games like that. If you still had, games, and even that's changing now, right? Like Amazon getting the NBA, Netflix now going to be showing the NFL. Really obsolete. So it's interesting to see how that goes. I think ESPN itself, I don't think they're going necessarily anywhere. I do agree with the assessment that ESPN is still pretty strong. I don't agree with people when they say that. I think despite of that, one kind of will survive. Now they are taking hits, that's for sure, because of all the things we just talked about. But I think they're still doing their numbers are still well. It's not like they got 11 million on YouTube, 11 million followers on YouTube. The linear numbers are still strong. They're still probably making more money from linear than anybody else. They're kind of starting now. ESPN2 is pretty much turning into their podcast arm. They're probably hoping that somebody else besides McAfee kind of bubbles up for them or whatever. So I think they're going to be in good enough shape. When you have resources and reach, you have an advantage. So they absolutely have that. And that's kind of what Brother Charles was talking about. Guys like him and me and all these other guys that are out here that are just by ourselves, basically. There's only so much reach you can have. There's only so much you can do. But it does now eat into the legacy media. They don't have it all for themselves. And they certainly don't have all the influence for themselves. So the interesting path of sports media is we don't know where it's going. And I think that's a good thing for independent media, for YouTubers, for Spotify, for people out here that are out here doing things that are absolutely interesting, and the conversations that we're having is just fantastic. It's interesting to see the evolution of it. Like even when I started Burberry Sports a couple years ago, one of the reasons I started is because I didn't see a podcast really that talked Orioles and Ravens all the time. A lot of times it was one or the other. Not a lot of Orioles because the Orioles weren't good team. Now I see them all over the place. There's about 4 or 5 that I see all the time. Shout out Exit 52 podcast. Shout out Bobby Baltimore. Shout out Press Box. Shout out NSG. Shout out these guys. That are doing this. There wasn't that many. Now they're popping up more and more. So it's interesting to see how sports media is going to evolve. I think Levitar is wrong. We haven't evolved. I think everything changes. Life changes. And I'm a big believer in that art imitates life, not the other way around, right? I think things change on camera because they're changing in society, right? It's you see it a lot of times in pro wrestling, in sports, in television, in all types of media circuits. They change the product on camera because the audience rejects it, which you were doing. So now you give them something else that they might like. I think that the life itself kind of dictates the art, not the other way around. I don't believe that people. I've never been a believer that the life imitates art, etc. So, thank you very much for joining us here on the Bravery Sports Podcast. Definitely check us out this week.
Oh, put me in cold. I'm ready to play.
Love that song. We were talking about baseball summer this week. Bowie Bay Sox. We're going to talk about them this week. Outstanding group at Bowie as well. Talking about some of the great players that they have. We'll get to that on Wednesday night. So thank you very much for joining us on the Bravery Sports Podcast. We will see you Wednesday.